Hey guys, tonight we ease into the cold corridors of Brooklyn, back when streetlights hummed low and the sidewalks never quite forgot what they saw. We're stepping into the life of a man whose nickname alone could drain the warmth from any room. Anthony Gaspipe Casso. Picture Bensonhurst at dusk, rows of brick buildings, a hot breeze dragging yesterday's news across cracked pavement, and a kid with coal in his eyes, already learning how to hide things better than he found them. His fists are small, sure, but his silences are sharper than a box cutter in a glove box. This isn't just another gangster bedtime story. This one comes with frost under the fingernails, and if you're thinking you'd survive 5 minutes in his world, let's just say the streets didn't keep trophies, only debts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening from. Always love knowing who else is drifting through the underworld with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins on Bay 7th Street, a neighborhood straddling two worlds, working-class dreams and side-street economies. Anthony Salvatore Casso, born May 21st, 1942, is the youngest of three. His father, Michael, is a hard-working man with a plumbing business, the kind of guy who tightens bolts with one hand and shakes neighborhood hands with the other. He wants better for his son, but not that much better. After all, the Cassos already knew how to look the other way. There's a quiet compromise in that kind of upbringing. Anthony's childhood isn't drenched in tragedy. There are birthday cakes, cousins, block parties. He plays stickball, skips homework, and sneaks smokes behind garages. But there's something off. Teachers note he's bright, but never invested. The other kids joke that Anthony doesn't blink when a fight breaks out, doesn't cheer, doesn't flinch, just watches. By age 12, he's already hanging near pool halls where the jukeboxes skip and older men nod with unsaid offers. At 14, he's running errands for wise guys who wear wool suits in summer and never pay for their own drinks. He's sharp, polite, and never asks dumb questions. In Bensonhurst, that's how respect starts. One afternoon, he's approached by a man everyone calls Zips, a small-time fence who traffics in misplaced radios and watches that tick just a little too fast. Zips tosses him a bundle wrapped in wax paper, cash, obviously, and says, "Bring this to Carmine. Don't stop. Don't open it. Don't even think about it." Anthony delivers. Doesn't peek. Doesn't hesitate. When Carmine opens the package, he looks at the boy and simply says, You don't blink." That line stays with him. By 16, Anthony is already living part-time in the world of whispers. He skips class to stake out delivery trucks, learns the art of eavesdropping at barbershops, picks up poker hands faster than most pick up their lunch. He also learns what fear smells like. Sweat under cologne, breath that rattles before bad news. But he also learns that confidence isn't loud. It's the guy who says the least who gets the most room at the table. His father still wants him in the plumbing trade, brings him to work sites, hands him pipe wrenches, shows him how to solder copper. But Anthony hates the way his hands get burned. He hates the honest work even more. "You gonna fix toilets forever?" he once whispers to himself while scrubbing his arms raw of pipe grease. By his late teens, he's brushing shoulders with low-level Lucchese associates. He's not made, not even close, but they know him. They nod when he enters the room. He runs errands, keeps eyes on drop spots, and never asks who's watching him back. That's the golden rule. Know everything, say nothing. One night, a bodega owner stiffs a protection collector, says business is slow. Anthony, unprompted, returns the next day, not with threats, just with presence. He leans by the lotto machine, says nothing for nearly 40 minutes, then buys a stick of gum and leaves. The next week, the payment's made, plus interest. Word spreads. This is also the era when the 5 families are adjusting to post-Gallo Brooklyn. The streets are still reeling from shootouts, betrayals, and fresh alliances. And yet, amidst the noise, Anthony begins to hone what will be his greatest weapon: his silence. He doesn't bark. He doesn't swagger. But everyone begins to notice that rooms feel colder when he's in them. By the early 1960s, Casso is loosely connected to Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, future Lucchese boss. Not closely, but enough that someone vouches, and that's all it takes. A soft nod from the right man, and you're suddenly useful, or at least watched more carefully. One summer, a rival cruise car gets torched. No one saw anything, except Anthony. But he says nothing. Even when the local precinct pokes around, he shrugs. I was home, watching the Mets lose. Many people still think that Casso was involved in the setup, that he arranged it to prove loyalty. Others argue it was pure coincidence. Wrong place, wrong car. So, what do you think? Was young Gaspipe already laying traps before his 20s? By 21, Anthony is no longer the boy with quiet eyes. He's a whisper in a city that's already hoarse from shouting. He's not a killer. Not yet. But the way people stand straighter around him, that says more than any blood ever could. And somewhere in a Bensonhurst alley, the first of many debts has just been paid. Without a word, the city keeps moving, but Anthony Casso begins to walk at his own rhythm. It's 1963, and while most 21-year-olds are trying to impress girls or find 9-to-5 jobs, Anthony is apprenticing in the fine art of vanishing footprints. His father still calls him to job sites, sometimes out of pride, sometimes out of desperation. But Anthony? He's slipping deeper into another family, one that doesn't advertise on business cards. He spends more and more time at the Glass Room, a small social club wedged between a funeral parlor and a tailor shop, where the laughter is low, the drinks are cheap, and the back door always stays locked. It's the kind of place where men use first names sparingly and last names never. Anthony learns to read body language faster than blueprints. A twitch here, a long drag on a cigarette there. It's all communication. The plumbing van is still parked outside his parents' home each morning, but most days, the tools stay untouched. At the club, he starts as a runner, picking up envelopes, watching the door, sometimes just sitting quietly and listening. And that's what gets him noticed. He doesn't try too hard, doesn't tell jokes, just pays attention. Especially to the man in the corner booth with the slow hands and thick wrists. Frankie Pearl Buttons, a mid-level Lucchese collector known for taking his coffee like his warnings. Short, dark, and barely sweetened, Frankie sees something in Anthony. Maybe it's the patience. Maybe it's the eyes that don't blink. One day, he sends him on a light errand. A guy down by Sheepshead Bay owes more than he admits. Don't touch him, Frankie says. Just make sure he knows we haven't forgotten. Anthony shows up with a bag of warm bagels and a receipt book. Says he's from the city's collections office. Talks nice. Smiles. Doesn't even raise his voice. But the next day, the debt is paid in full, plus $2,000 extra. Word starts to spread again, this time with whispers. That kid, The one with the bagels? He doesn't mess around. Still, Casso doesn't see himself as a tough guy. Not yet. He's careful, calculating. He once tells a friend, being feared is good, but being predictable, that's what gets you killed. He models himself not on the loud mouths, but the quiet operators, the ones who disappear before the cops show up and leave a full ashtray without ever lighting a cigarette. By 1965, he's making real money, not just street change. His cut from small loans, numbers rackets, and side deals with jewelers and pawn shops earns more than a union plumber could dream of. But he's still smart about it. Buys his parents a new refrigerator. Fixes up the plumbing van even though he no longer uses it. Keeps his receipts. Keeps his suits pressed. Keeps his mouth closed. He starts dating a local girl, Lillian. Pretty, reserved, smart enough to ignore the rumors, but not so naive that she doesn't notice the late-night calls or the bruises on his knuckles. He never talks business with her, never needs to. She just learns how to fold questions into laundry and how to smile through worry. At one point, a friend asks him why he stays in Brooklyn when he could have moved to Manhattan, maybe set up near the docks or even slide into Wall Street scams. Anthony just shrugs. I like places where people remember your father's name and that loyalty runs deep. Even when a cousin skims a little off a dice game, Casso doesn't overreact. He waits. He watches. Then he invites him to a barbecue, grills him a steak, and tells him softly over a beer, "Next time you skim, you'll be the charcoal." The cousin laughs until he sees that Anthony isn't smiling. By now, the Lucchese family is starting to notice him. Not just the foot soldiers, but guys higher up. One night at the club, he's asked to sit in on a late meeting. No introductions, just a bottle of scotch, 3 men in good suits, and a single sheet of paper with a name scribbled on it. One of the men points and asks, "You know this guy?" Anthony glances, nods. "Good. We need to know where he sleeps." And just like that, Casso is in the game. Really in it. No more errands. No more tests. From this point forward, every choice he makes echoes. Every phone call matters. Every set of footsteps might be the last. Many people still think that this moment, that single night at the club, was when Casso made his first official move into the mob's inner circle. Others argue he'd already been inducted silently, long before anyone took notice. So what do you think? Did Gaspipe step into the spotlight? Or was he always behind it, just waiting for the right cue? But even power has its price. That winter, his uncle is mugged outside a bakery. Not mob-related, just a junkie with a broken switchblade and bad timing. Anthony finds out within hours, tracks the guy down by nightfall. No threats, no gun, just a car ride with no destination. The mugger is never seen again. The cops ask questions. Nobody answers. And the neighborhood? It sleeps a little easier. Still, there's something shifting in Anthony. The more he's trusted, the less he trusts. He starts carrying 2 sets of keys, one for real, one for insurance. Switches phone booths, times his walks, never orders the same thing twice in a restaurant. And yet he still manages to smile when he brings flowers to his mother every Sunday, because that's the duality of Gaspipe. On one hand, the polite son with perfect posture. On the other, a man learning how to erase names with the same ease he once erased chalkboards in school. By the end of the decade, Anthony Casso is no longer just a plumber's boy with cold eyes. He's a rising shadow. And Brooklyn has started whispering. It's 1967, and the city is louder now. Sirens blur into car horns. Radios spill James Brown from every bodega, and the subway smells like sweat, hot dogs, and secrets. But Anthony Casso remains still in the chaos. Not because he's unaffected, but because he's watching. Always watching. He's in his mid-20s now, fully immersed in the quiet architecture of street power. Most guys his age chase cars or status. Anthony? He's chasing patterns. When people move, who they owe, what they fear. He's not flashy. He doesn't drive a Cadillac with custom plates or wear rings on every finger. He still takes the R train sometimes, still pays cash at the deli. But when he walks into a room, people lean just a little away from him, like cold air passed through their collar. There's a job on the table. Not a killing. Not yet. But a high-stakes robbery on Avenue P. The mark is a connected guy from another family, a loan shark who's been skimming from a union fund. Anthony's not the lead, just backup, the guy in the shadows. But that's what makes it dangerous. One misstep, and you're not just robbing a man. You're declaring war. The plan is tight, in and out. No faces, no names, but something goes wrong. The alarm doesn't trip like it was supposed to. The lookout gets nervous and bails. And worst of all, the guy inside? He's home early. Casso moves quick. Doesn't shoot. Doesn't panic. He clocks the guy across the head with the butt of his pistol, ties him up, and finishes the job clean. They grab the cash, about $50,000, and disappear before the neighbors finish their dinner. But here's the twist. 2 days later, Anthony shows up at the victim's doorstep. Alone. No mask. No crew. He knocks. When the man opens the door, his eyes still swollen, Anthony doesn't say a word, just stares, then walks away. That's how legends start. Because the message is clear. I let you live. Don't make me explain why. Word spreads. And not just in Brooklyn. Up in the Bronx, down in Staten Island, even across the river in Jersey. People start asking, who's the kid with the stare? Many people still think that this robbery was a test, that the Lucchese higher-ups set it up just to see how Casso would handle failure. Others argue it was a rogue job, and Anthony just spun the chaos into myth. So what do you think? Was he being tested? Or was he writing his own script? By now, he's trusted with more than collections. He's pulled into quiet conversations about distribution, enforcement, even arbitration. There's a moment when he's asked to mediate between two crews over a disputed gambling route. Instead of choosing sides, he draws a map, folds it in half, and hands it back with just 5 words. Figure it out, or disappear. They figure it out. Frankie Pearlbuttons starts referring to him as Gaspipe. No one knows exactly why. Some say it's because he once threatened a man using a gas pipe from an old boiler room. Others claim it's just because he delivers bad news like gas. Silent, invisible, and fatal if left unchecked. The name sticks. Gaspipe. He doesn't correct anyone. There's another job now. Smaller, simpler. A guy named Vinny, 2-time to pickup. Tried to keep some for himself. He's not part of the family. Just a guy who got too bold. Anthony doesn't make a show of it. He finds Vinny at a pool hall, buys him a drink, sits across from him. You did what you did, he says. But I'm not mad. Vinny breathes easier. Smiles. Thinks he got lucky. Then Anthony leans in. I just wanted to see what kind of thief smiles in the dark. That's the last anyone sees of Vinny. But Casso? He goes home, kisses his wife, eats a bowl of pasta with his mother, sleeps like it's just another Tuesday. He keeps his crew small, never more than 4 or 5 guys. Not because he's paranoid, well, not just that, but because fewer mouths mean fewer mistakes. He reads people like mechanics read gauges. knows when someone's lying just by how they stir their coffee, and he starts investing quietly, buys into a dry cleaning chain, flips a few apartments through shell companies, hires an accountant who knows how to turn red ink invisible. One day he sees a kid outside a candy store pocket $1 that isn't his. The shop owner doesn't notice. The kid runs. Anthony catches him at the end of the block. No yelling. Just puts a hand on his shoulder and says, "Everything you take, you carry. Even when your pockets are empty." The kid nods, returns the $1, never steals again. Even the small moments feel heavy around him. Casso also starts building relationships with other families. Not alliances, just conversations. He knows who's sleeping with who's quietly stealing from the wrong guy, who's due for a reminder. He doesn't use this information often, but when he does, it's always at the right time. There's a dinner one night in Little Italy. A big deal. Capos from 3 families in one room. Someone cracks a joke about plumbers and dirty hands. Casso smiles, wipes his hands on a napkin and says, "Funny thing, dirty hands build clean ledgers." The table goes quiet, then they laugh. But nobody jokes like that again. He begins refining his image. Not a thug, not a hothead, just a man who understands timing. When to speak, when to vanish, when to remind people that silence isn't weakness, it's efficiency. By the end of the decade, Gaspipe Casso is no longer a rising name. He's a known presence, and still, he hasn't raised his voice once. By 1970, Anthony Casso is fluent in the unspoken languages of New York's underworld. He knows which footsteps belong to which debts, which phone rings mean business, and which silences are a warning. And he moves through this orchestra of tension like a man who wrote the sheet music himself. He's not a capo. Not yet. But his name carries the kind of weight that makes others clear a table or fake a smile. Still, he prefers the background. There's power in being underestimated, in being the guy who walks past security, not through it, in letting someone else do the shouting while he watches the exits. His main crew now operates along the southern edge of Brooklyn, threading operations from Gravesend to Canarsie. They run numbers, small loans, union scams, and, more quietly, a growing network of hijack teams. Gaspipe doesn't like messes. He doesn't like blood unless it serves a point. But when he strikes, it's surgical, and usually silent. There's a job brewing, one that would later become legend. A stolen shipment of high-end stereo equipment is sitting in a warehouse near Red Hook. It's lightly guarded, and the owners are playing both ends. They've tried to insure it twice from 2 different firms. That's all Gaspipe needs to know. He assembles a team. 2 drivers, 1 lockman, 1 watcher on the roof, and himself in the shadows. The job is clean. No gunshots, no alarms. They're in and out in under 20 minutes. The next morning, the gear is gone, the warehouse door is intact, and the insurance adjusters are baffled. They call it the echo job, because not a sound was made, and the street remembers things like that. Still, the mob isn't just about jobs, it's about politics. And Gaspipe knows how to play that game too. He attends weddings he doesn't care about, kisses cheeks he secretly despises, sends bottles of wine to guys he'd rather toss off rooftops. All part of the dance, but he never loses control. If someone crosses him, he doesn't scream. He waits, sometimes months, sometimes years, until the offender thinks they've gotten away with it. Then, tap tap, the consequences arrive. In one case, a small-time associate pockets an extra cut from a sports betting ring. He isn't whacked. He's relocated to a no-show job on the edge of Staten Island. Same pay, less dignity. Message delivered. The Lucchese leadership starts to notice his efficiency and his restraint. He's not a cowboy. He doesn't make waves. But the streets, they ripple around him anyway. There's a turning point that same year. A mid-level enforcer named Joey No Knees starts talking loud at clubs, hinting he knows things about Casso. Nothing major, just noise. But noise travels. Gaspipe finds him at a diner, slides into the booth without asking. "You like coffee?" he asks. Joey nods. Gaspipe pours sugar slowly, without breaking eye contact. "You talk sweet," he says. But that sweetness, it dissolves fast in heat. Joey leaves town the next morning. Nobody tells him to. He just leaves. Many people still think that Joey had something on Gaspipe, that maybe once they'd run a job together that went sideways. Others claim Joey was just drunk and stupid. So what do you think? Was there a skeleton or just echoes? Meanwhile, Anthony's home life is still strangely intact. Lillian is patient, quiet. She doesn't ask where the money comes from, doesn't pry. She cooks, she cleans. She keeps the kids on routine and the house immaculate. And Anthony? He's present, at least on the surface. He makes it home for Sunday dinner, pays for Catholic school, even helps with homework. But there's always a thin veil between him and everyone else, like he's living 2 inches to the left of real life. His mother still nags him to wear a scarf. His father, long retired from plumbing, gives him quiet nods. They never talk business, ever. Not because they don't care, but because some things don't need saying. At the club, Anthony begins mentoring younger associates, teaching them the things you don't learn in movies. Don't brag, don't bluff, don't wear the same shoes to 2 sit-downs, and always, always check the mirrors in a restaurant before you sit down. He also starts investing in relationships outside the mob. Cops, clerks, low-level city officials, a parking permit here, a permit signature there. He doesn't need favors now, but he will. He always plans 5 years ahead. One of his protégés, a wiry kid named Benny, asks him one night, "How do you know who's gonna flip?" Casso just sips his espresso. "Everyone flips," he says. Question is, how soon and how useful? By the mid-70s, Anthony's influence has grown quiet roots. He's not flashy like John Gotti, not flamboyant like Joe Colombo was. But that's what makes him dangerous. He's not building a brand. He's building a file on everyone. Favors traded, secrets held, weaknesses logged like weather reports. One evening, during a dinner with a few Lucchese captains, someone jokes that Gaspipe must have a Rolodex with everyone's sins in it. Anthony doesn't laugh, just stirs his sauce, then says softly, "I don't write things down." That's the first time anyone realizes. He remembers everything. From the name of a guy who shorted a cigar shipment in '68, to the color of the shoes worn by a bookie who disappeared in '71. He files it all away, like a vault with no hinges, and if you ever owed him anything, he still remembers. Brooklyn starts changing. Old storefronts close, new immigrants arrive, and the skyline shifts. But Anthony Casso remains the same, still tailored, still soft-spoken, still the whisper behind a closed door. The furnace in his eyes hasn't cooled, it's just learned how to burn cleaner. By the time the 1980s roll in, the rules of the game are shifting. But Anthony Casso is already playing 5 moves ahead. The flashy days of big Cadillacs and open-air sit-downs are thinning out. Surveillance is smarter, indictments come faster, and even the most seasoned wise guys start watching their shadows. But Casso? He thrives in shadows. He wears them like a second suit. He's not yet underboss, not yet the right hand of Ikamuso, but he's positioned like a bishop on the board. quietly guarding, always threatening a strike. And what's more, he's respected, not loved, not feared like a bogeyman. Respected. That quiet, dangerous kind that builds in back rooms and cement yards. His network by now includes more than soldiers and bookmakers. He's drawing in teamsters, construction foremen, union reps, the real money men. Not the ones holding pistols, but the ones holding clipboards. He figures out quickly that the fastest way to make $1 million isn't through hijacking trucks anymore. It's through construction contracts and pension funds. Still, there's no escaping muscle work, especially not when tensions rise between crews. One night in 1981, a dispute brews over territory in the garment district. A Gambino associate starts dipping into Lucchese-run corners, shaking down storefronts and flashing steel like it's still 1955. Casso's crew gives one warning, then another. The third response comes in silence. The guy disappears on a Tuesday. His car turns up 2 days later, untouched. The keys are still in the ignition. Inside the trunk? Nothing. Not even a smudge. It's as if he was erased. Casso says nothing, doesn't gloat, doesn't call attention. But suddenly, everyone remembers which blocks belong to the Lucchese. It's around this time the Brooklyn Ledger operation begins, an innocuous name for a carefully engineered web of loan sharks, protection rackets, and shell businesses. Each piece looks small on its own. A dry cleaner here, a pizzeria there, but together, they generate tens of thousands a month, tax-free, cleanly laundered through neighborhood staples. Casso oversees it like a conductor. No flair, just small, deliberate movements. And when someone misses a payment, he doesn't shout. He shows up, sits down, eats half a cannoli, and lets the silence work the rest. Many people still think that the ledger wasn't just an operation, but a map. That it was also used to track loyalty within the family. Who was delivering? Who was skimming? Who was late? So, what do you think? Was Casso just keeping accounts or keeping score? One incident cements the myth further. A mid-level Lucchese guy, Gino Red Eyes, starts getting sloppy. Drinking too much, flashing money, mouthing off. Normally, the higher-ups might demote him, or worse. But Casso takes a different approach. He invites Gino to lunch. No bodyguards, no tension. Midway through the meal, Anthony leans over and says, "You ever wonder how quick someone can go blind?" Gino laughs nervously. Anthony finishes his espresso. "Stop wondering." Red Eyes sobers up within a week. Moves to Miami. Opens a laundromat. Lives quietly ever after. Casso's touch is rarely violent, but always memorable. In this period, he also deepens his relationship with Vicamuso. They're not best friends, not exactly confidants, but there's a mutual recognition. Amuso sees in Casso what most overlook: precision. Where others run operations with bravado, Casso slices through them like blueprints. Measured, deliberate, unshakable. He starts taking more meetings with union men, not just wise guys, but those who can swing entire jobs with a handshake. He doesn't threaten, he incentivizes. You keep the job moving, you get a cut. You stall? Well, delays are expensive for everyone. One particularly slick deal comes when Casso reroutes construction material intended for a hospital project. The materials never show. The paperwork looks clean. No one goes to jail. But someone ends up with 3 new investment properties in Diker Heights. And Anthony? He gets what he always wants: leverage. There's also a shift in how he views the world. He begins keeping tabs on law enforcement, not just watching them, but infiltrating them. He meets two NYPD detectives through mutual contacts, and a quiet deal begins. Information for protection. Surveillance tips. Who's flipping? Who's listening? Casso doesn't brag, but inside he knows. He's now playing chess while the rest are still playing gin rummy. At home, things stay quiet. His kids are growing. Lillian hosts dinner without asking about late arrivals or the occasional bruised knuckle. Anthony doesn't drink much, doesn't gamble heavily, doesn't do drugs. His only addiction, if you can call it that, is control. He has routines, specific ones. Never parks the car in the same spot twice. Never enters the house without checking the rear view. Always lets someone else open the restaurant door first, a friend once joked. Gaspipe could hear a lie in Morse code. He just raised an eyebrow and replied, "Only if it's tapped right." He keeps close to home, but expands quietly. Brooklyn remains his throne, but his reach creeps into Queens, parts of the Bronx, even touches of Long Island. Not by force, by influence. Everyone knows someone who owes him a favor. In '83, he's nearly caught. A federal wiretap operation closes in on a gambling ring connected to his crew. The FBI has names, locations, even recorded audio. But somehow, no one sees Anthony. No voice matches, no face surfaces. A week later, the tapes go missing. The technician who signed them out is reassigned. Casso doesn't celebrate, just tightens the circle again. One less friend, one more insurance policy. That's how he survives. Quiet corrections, never punishment, just balance. He starts to feel untouchable, and maybe, just maybe, he's right. By 1984, Anthony Gaspipe Casso is no longer just a shadow under Lucchese's umbrella. He's become a weather system in his own right. Not loud, not obvious, but in every corner of the city's underworld, people are adjusting their posture when they hear his name. There's a chill that follows it, like a breeze from a door that shouldn't be open. He's still not a made boss. But titles are a formality when fear and respect beat you to the room. Casso walks into clubs where the air thins out, not because anyone's afraid of being hit, though that's always on the table, but because people don't want to disappoint him. Somehow, that's worse. He's now fully entrenched in what's known as the Brooklyn Ledger, but the books have grown, the operations have ballooned. He's handling construction scams, garbage hauling rackets, city contract bidding fraud, and a growing loan shark enterprise that stretches like veins under the borough. Every one of those lines has his fingerprints, even if no one can prove it. And this is when the car bomb era begins. The first incident is simple. A rival associate, someone too curious about union dues and too quick with questions, finds his sedan turned into a flamethrower. He survives, barely, but leaves New York within a week. No one gets blamed, no charges stick, but the message circulates faster than newsprint. Gaspipe doesn't knock. He detonates. This tactic, cold and mechanical, becomes his signature in the coming years. It's clean in its own brutal way. No shots, no bodies dumped in the harbor, just smoke, flame, and a trail of insurance confusion. Still, Casso remains unbothered. On any given Tuesday, he's eating veal parm at a quiet Bensonhurst restaurant, nodding politely to the waiter, folding his napkin with care. He's not hiding. He just walks like a man who knows he's being watched and doesn't care. And the Lucchese brass, they love it, or at the very least, they respect it. Vic Amuso rises to boss, and Casso inches even closer to the core. Officially, he's still a soldier, maybe a capo on paper. But in whispered conversations and dimly lit backrooms, he's referred to as the fixer. The one you call when diplomacy fails and decency's already dead. That's when the NYPD notices something peculiar. Crime rates in certain areas are going down, but not because things are better, because things are managed. Casso's form of order is brutal, sure, but it's consistent. No petty turf wars, no unsanctioned hits. Even muggers in Bensonhurst start choosing other neighborhoods. He's also deepening his ties with the detectives. Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, two actual NYPD officers moonlighting for the mob, paid hands with badges and guns. They feed him intel, tip him off about investigations, even point out witnesses who are about to talk. The system is folding inward. Gaspipe isn't just dodging law enforcement, he's redirecting it. Many people still think that this was the beginning of Casso's untouchable phase, that by the mid-'80s, with cops in his pocket and rivals either buried or bribed, he could have walked into a courtroom and walked out the front door, whistling. Others argue it made him reckless, that having too much control dulled his edge. So what do you think? Was this brilliance or the start of blind confidence? There's another moment, a quiet one, that haunts some people more than the violence. A longtime friend, Bobby the Bag, asks Casso for a favor, a job for his nephew. Nothing serious, just something to keep the kid out of trouble. Anthony nods, says he'll make some calls. 3 days later, Bobby is found tied to a chair in an abandoned butcher shop. Nobody knows why. The favor wasn't a betrayal. There was no skimming. But Casso never explains. And somehow that's worse, because now people start wondering if they've done something wrong, even when they haven't. That's the genius of Gaspipe. He doesn't have to strike to be effective. He just needs you to believe he might. Paranoia becomes his calling card. He also sharpens his tactics. Starts using burner cars, vehicles registered under shell names, used once, then dumped or dismantled. He recruits lookouts who don't know who they're working for. Even his own crew only hears parts of a plan, never the whole, and he moves funds constantly. One day it's hidden in safety deposit boxes across Queens. The next, it's baked into offshore construction contracts through Cyprus and Malta. He's building an empire out of whispers, but at home, he's still Anthony, the son, the father, the guy who brings pastries on Sundays and asks about school grades with the same calm voice he uses to order hits. His duality is seamless. There's a holiday dinner where his daughter mentions wanting to visit Rome one day. Anthony smiles and says, "If you go, don't take the Colosseum too seriously." Everyone there thought they were in charge too. Nobody laughs. He doesn't mind. He's not interested in being funny. He's interested in being remembered. In late 1985, the commission case explodes. Rudy Giuliani brings down a wave of indictments against the heads of the 5 families. The mob is shaken. There are funerals. There are secrets pulled apart in courtrooms. But Anthony Casso, he barely flinches. He adapts. He changes how meetings are held, switches up communication, more coded payphones, more layers, less visibility. While the others panic, he tightens his grip. The streets, for all their chaos, become his kingdom. But even kings make enemies, and some of them are getting closer. It's 1986, and while much of the mafia world is reeling from indictments, informants, and courtroom parades, Anthony Casso is busy recalibrating. Where others see chaos, he sees opportunity. Power doesn't disappear after all. It just changes doorways. He begins to shed what little pretense remains. No more pretending he's just a businessman with construction interests. Everyone who needs to know already knows who Gaspipe is. The difference now? He's making sure they know he knows everything they know, and that makes him untouchable in a new way. Not through firepower, but through certainty. Still, the violence doesn't stop. It just evolves. Casso no longer gets his hands dirty unless absolutely necessary, but he signs off on hits like a man adjusting a thermostat. Small movements, big consequences. One such move comes when a former associate, Nicky 3 Doors, begins bragging at a club in Flatbush. He's drunk, loud, and telling stories that shouldn't be told. Nothing damning, yet. But the implication is there. That he once knew Gaspipe's routines, that he'd been close. The next day, Nicky's apartment burns down. No one's hurt, but the fire is surgical. Just his unit, just his belongings. Casso doesn't call him, doesn't need to. Nicky relocates to Pittsburgh within a week. The message, once again, has no return address. Casso is now operating as the de facto underboss to Vic Amuso. Official promotions are slow because hierarchy in the mob is sticky and cautious, but no one disputes it. If Amuso is the front-facing boss, Casso is the lever behind the curtain, and together they begin to orchestrate a quiet internal war. The Lucchese family, like many of the others, is riddled with factions. Old guard capos who believe in loyalty codes and handshakes. Younger guys who want fast cash and faster cars. And then there's the greedy middle, the ones playing both sides. Casso has no patience for them. He draws up a list, names, faces, histories. Who's too loud? Who's too greedy? Who's spending too much time in Miami? And one by one, those names start vanishing. Sometimes it's obvious. A body in the trunk, a headline in the daily news. Other times, not even a rumor. He works closely with his NYPD assets, Ippolito and Caracappa. They deliver addresses, court schedules, surveillance footage, even names of potential rats. In return, they get envelopes, thick ones. This arrangement becomes one of the most efficient pipelines of betrayal in mob history. Casso doesn't just avoid police interference, he uses it. Sends his guys out 5 minutes before a raid, finds out who flipped before they even sit in a courtroom. Many people still think that Casso's corruption of NYPD detectives was the most brilliant move in modern mafia history. Others argue it was the one sin that made him arrogant, convinced he could control the system forever. So what do you think? Was he playing chess or playing with fire? There's a moment, small but telling, that captures his mindset. He's at a wake, a quiet one, a cousin of an associate. He doesn't know the deceased well, but he shows up, as expected, pays his respects, says hello to the widow, and as he's leaving, an older man grabs his elbow, softly, and says, "Thank you for coming." Casso nods, then pauses. "You know," he says, "we remember who shows up, but we never forget who doesn't." That line spreads faster than eulogies. In this era, he also begins investing heavily in real estate, not just under the table flips, but through layered LLCs and offshore names, warehouses in Jersey, strip malls in Staten Island, a parking garage in Queens that makes more in bribes than in quarters. Each property becomes a piece of insulation, not just wealth, but a wall, a place to hide, a place to funnel money, a place to meet if needed. He avoids big parties now, avoids group dinners unless absolutely necessary. There's no more walking into clubs unannounced. Everything is clocked, every appearance measured. Yet despite the caution, the hits keep coming. The most chilling of them all, a man named Bruno, a quiet Lucchese soldier with a gambling problem and a girlfriend who liked to talk. Too much. One night, Bruno vanishes. His car is found abandoned near an overpass. Inside the trunk, nothing, not a trace. But inside the glove box, one photo. Bruno and his girlfriend smiling. Dated. Torn at the corner. That photo gets passed around quietly. Everyone understands what it means. We're watching everything. The FBI is watching too. They're tapping phones, wiring snitches, and stacking cases. But Casso is still a ghost on the paperwork. Names are dropped. Witnesses talk. But nothing sticks. At one point, a federal agent reportedly says, "We know he's the eye of the storm. We just can't find the wind." Meanwhile, Anthony keeps Sunday dinners going. Still kisses his kids on the cheek. Still calls his mother to check on her blood pressure. He exists in two worlds, flawlessly. He once tells a younger associate, "It's not what you do, it's how long you do it without blinking." But even he knows it's getting harder to blink because the air's starting to shift. Too many questions, too many cameras, and the first cracks are forming where no one's supposed to look. By 1987, Brooklyn hums like a machine built from asphalt, debts, and second chances. And somewhere deep inside that engine, Anthony Casso continues to turn the gears with a touch so cold it burns. He's not just executing orders anymore. He's writing the script others are afraid to read aloud. But with every tightening grip, someone always squirms. This is the era when loyalty, already a fragile thing, begins to feel more like currency than creed. And Casso? He trades in both. He's meticulous now. Keeps tabs on who shows up, who delays, who suddenly takes vacations they never mentioned. The Lucchese family is being reshaped in his image, streamlined, efficient, quiet, and increasingly paranoid. The whispers come from within. There's talk that Casso is too powerful, that Vic Amuso, while boss in title, is becoming a figurehead, that Casso is calling shots from behind the curtain, setting rules, pulling triggers without needing permission. And while Vic and Anthony are still aligned on paper, the gap between them begins to widen ever so slightly. It starts with decisions. Who gets clipped? Who gets promoted? Who gets paid? Small things, but enough to start a breeze. And in a world this combustible, even a breeze can blow out candles or fan flames. Amuso is not stupid. He watches Casso's rise carefully, perhaps nervously, but he doesn't confront him. He needs him. They all do, because Casso still gets results, always has. One night, a meeting is called at a social club in Queens, neutral ground. Casso is late, not by accident. He arrives, coat over his arm, no entourage, says nothing for a full minute, just looks around the room. Then, let's stop pretending this is about anything but trust. Nobody answers. That silence is the real meeting. Later that week, an associate who had been pushing too hard for rank is found slumped in a stairwell in the Bronx. No witnesses, no bullet. Just gone. Casso never comments, never mentions the name again. Many people still think this period, late 87 into early 88, was when the power balance in Lucchese shifted for good. That Casso quietly became the true boss in everything but title. Others argue he was just the most ruthless lieutenant the mob ever saw. So what do you think? Was he a usurper, or the only man who could hold the empire together? Meanwhile, the city is cracking down. Giuliani's campaign against organized crime is still in full swing. RICO cases are stacking like poker chips, but Casso remains untouched. His name only whispered, never written. He tightens his protocols. New burner phones, more frequent movement, dead drops instead of meetings. He even rotates his driver every month. No one sees the same version of him twice, and yet his violence becomes more precise. No more improvisation. Each hit feels like it's been edited, rehearsed, and filmed in a single take. One operation, Atlantic Avenue's ghost voice, they call it, becomes street legend. A bookmaker named Richie Iannone starts getting sloppy. He's talking numbers in bars, flirting with undercovers, and worst of all, boasting about being tight with the Gaspipe. Anthony hears about it on a Thursday. By Sunday, Richie's voice is gone. Permanently, his throat is cut. Not deep enough to kill him immediately, but enough to ensure he never speaks above a whisper again. He survives, but he relocates to Florida and refuses to ever speak of Brooklyn again. The message? Don't trade on names you haven't earned. Back at home, things stay eerily consistent. Casso still kisses his wife goodnight, still shows up at weddings with envelopes, still takes his kids to Coney Island, holding their hands with the same fingers he's used to sign off on death warrants. He remains an enigma even to those closest. One of his soldiers once tried to describe him in a sit-down. It's like he knows you better than you do, like he already decided whether you live or die, and just hasn't told you yet. Another thing starts happening more often. People coming to confess to Casso, not religious confessions, but business ones. Mistakes, slights, sloppy deals. They admit things in hushed tones, hoping he'll see honesty as loyalty. Sometimes he nods and sends them on their way. Other times, those same people go missing a week later. It's a coin flip, and that's the genius. By mid-1988, Casso begins leveraging his corrupt NYPD contacts more aggressively. He doesn't just ask for protection, he asks for lists, surveillance logs, the names of potential informants. The detectives deliver, knowing full well what the consequences might be. He starts building what can only be described as a blacklist, a living document in his mind. Because remember, Gaspipe never writes things down. Each name is sorted, categorized: talkers, thieves, slackers, potential rats, and then the rarest, betrayers. Those names don't get second chances. Just parking spaces no one uses anymore. One night, at a private dinner above a small restaurant in Carroll Gardens, a lower-tier associate nervously asks, "Tony, what happens when we run out of streets?" Casso wipes his mouth with a cloth napkin, leans in, and says, "Then we pave new ones with old debts." He's not joking. This is also when he starts experimenting with proxy power. He promotes new faces, guys no one's watching, puts them in charge of collections, shipping routes, even contract bids. These men answer to no one but him, and so, slowly, a second family is forming within the Lucchese, one built on silence, speed, and subtlety. And if Vicamuso sees it, he says nothing, because even bosses know better than to interrupt a quiet man in the middle of building something permanent. By the close of 1988, Anthony Gaspipe Casso is no longer a name you whisper in fear. He's the reason you don't speak at all. The air around him feels thinner now, like walking into a freezer where the walls remember who's been there before. And the people closest to him, they're either drawing closer for protection or backing away for survival. The FBI knows he exists, but they still can't pin him. He's in photographs, but never in the foreground. He's mentioned in wiretaps, but never by name. Just him, or the guy from Brooklyn, or most often, nothing at all. He's managed to become the most feared man in the city, without ever once appearing in the headlines. And now he's got his own team of killers. Not the old school hitters, not the guys with thick mustaches and bad tempers. Casso builds a surgical squad, a clean, mobile, anonymous group that answers only to him. No questions, no post-job drinks, no calling home from a payphone to say, "It's done." He refers to them casually as the voice, because when they act, it's as though a whisper carried it out. Their targets aren't just rivals. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes it's a loose end from 10 years back. Other times, it's someone who simply knew too much. One of their most chilling jobs comes in late fall. A union delegate in Jersey who started sniffing too close to a no-show job fund tied to Casso's real estate schemes. The guy had no criminal record. He didn't even know who Casso was. He was just curious. He disappears on a Thursday. His shoes are found neatly placed at the edge of the Palisades. No note, no body, just absence. Casso's reach has become metaphysical. People are vanishing into silence, into rumor. But it's not just violence that fuels him now, it's information. He has a pipeline deeper than most intelligence agencies. Not just his pet NYPD detectives, but low-level city clerks, union accountants, even a funeral home manager who tips him off when a quiet burial might help him hide someone for a while. He's become, in essence, the architect of Brooklyn's criminal rhythm. People adjust their calendars to avoid his name. Guys change routes to avoid intersections he's known to frequent. Entire crews ask for reassignment if they're even rumored to be under his scrutiny. Many people still think that this period, late 1988 into early 89, was when Casso hit peak invisibility, that he could have ordered a hit from inside a church during Mass, and no one would have dared cough. Others believe he was already starting to crack from the pressure. That too much control, too much fear, begins to collapse in on itself. So what do you think? Was Gaspipe flying or falling? Despite everything, Casso still makes time for the rituals. He goes to weddings, holds court at christenings, sends envelopes to funerals with quiet notes, always handwritten, always brief. Once a rival's mother passes, someone suggests skipping the wake. There's bad blood. Casso disagrees. He goes, quietly, leaves flowers, says a prayer. When asked why, he responds, "Mothers bury sins. You don't cross that line." The man he's supposed to be feuding with sends a gift basket the next day. That's Casso. Somehow still operating within an old-world moral framework. Twisted, sure, but consistent. Predictably unpredictable. But pressure is building. He starts to feel it. There's an incident with a courier, one of his most trusted. A guy named Mikey Spoons. Mikey's late one day delivering an envelope from a warehouse deal. Only by 20 minutes. But when he arrives, he's sweating. Shaky. He claims traffic. Casso doesn't flinch, just nods. Takes the envelope. Doesn't say a word. 3 days later, Mikey has a gas leak in his home. He survives, moves to Arizona, and never uses the word traffic again. Casso's paranoia isn't wild. It's refined. Everything is plausible. Every message is coded. You never know if he's angry or just making space. And then comes the Broadway Street sting, one of the bigger operations tied to federal agents involving drugs, laundering, and kickbacks. Casso's name, his real name, starts to appear in notes, indirectly, of course, never attached to the crimes. But there it is, Anthony Casso, Brooklyn resident, businessman, subject of interest. He reads the reports, filtered through his detectives, and simply says, "Then we've got to lower the volume." What follows is a citywide slowdown. For 3 months, his crews go silent. No jobs, no collections, no muscle, just routine, polite nothingness. The FBI gets confused. They think maybe the Lucchese have gone dormant. Maybe they've fractured. But the truth is, Casso's just turning off the music so he can hear the walls better. And in those quiet weeks, he reorganizes everything. He demotes 2 captains, reassigns 3 union stewards, moves $2.1 million in cash from 6 safety deposit boxes into 8 new ones across 4 boroughs. He even replaces his tailor. That's how serious the silence is. At one point, someone asks if he's pulling back out of fear. Casso answers, "No, just reloading." By the year's end, he's back at full stride. The crews are active again. The books are busy. And the whisper has returned. Only now, it echoes. The calendar flips to 1989, but time doesn't move the same way for Anthony Casso. Where most people count in weeks or months, he measures in leverage, in favors owed, names remembered, and opportunities earned through long silences. He's nearly 47 now, but there's no softening at the edges. If anything, he's sharper, colder in his discipline, more surgical in his violence, and more precise in how he constructs the world around him. And by now, he's managing a full-scale murder program. That's not an exaggeration. Between his voice squad and his access to law enforcement intelligence, Anthony has turned Brooklyn into something closer to a chessboard than a borough. And he's the one moving the black pieces. The FBI has names. They have charts. They've started using red string. But every time they circle Casso, something slips. A witness goes silent. A recording is corrupted. A suspect flees before the indictment is delivered. This is not luck, this is systems. Because Casso now operates not just in shadows, but through them. Layers, fake names, disinformation, counter-surveillance, and most chilling of all, corrupted justice through detectives Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, his most valuable assets inside the NYPD. Casso starts not only protecting himself, but weaponizing their badges. These are not merely informants. These are hitmen with pensions. Together, they feed Casso information: who's being tailed, who's about to testify, what prosecutors know and what they don't. And when necessary, they remove problems entirely. One victim is Eddie Lino, a Gambino capo and made man. He's on Casso's list for various offenses, some personal, some political. Casso allegedly calls on his detectives to make it happen, and it happens. They pull Lino over while impersonating highway patrol. 2 uniformed cops, 1 unsuspecting target. Lino doesn't even have time to curse. Bullets, blood, asphalt silence. To the outside world, it's a mystery. Another mob hit. But Casso knows the truth. It wasn't a hit. It was an instruction followed. Many people still think that Lino's murder marked a turning point. That Casso had gone too far by turning badges into silencers. Others say it was inevitable. That Casso was only doing what others wished they had the nerve to. So what do you think? Was this a masterstroke? Or a step too far? Meanwhile, the Lucchese family isn't exactly a picture of unity. Vicamuso is still the boss in title, but whispers are growing. Some think he's relying too heavily on Casso. Others wonder if Casso's just waiting to take the top seat. But the truth? Casso doesn't want to be the boss. He wants to own the boss. And quietly, he already does. He handles the finances, the hits, the alliances. He builds the alliances a Muso can't. Makes the decisions Vic hesitates on. One old capo remarks, Vic gives orders, Gaspipe gives sentences, and it's not just within Lucchese. Other families are watching. Gambinos, Colombos, even the Genovese crew. Everyone's measuring their distance from Casso. Too close, and you might be used. Too far, and you might be next. Even street guys joke now. You don't want Gaspipe's attention, unless you're already dead. He keeps his day-to-day calm. Visits a sandwich shop near Sheepshead Bay every Tuesday. Always orders eggplant. Always tips 20%. Always leaves a paper napkin folded 3 times. No one ever sits at his table. One Tuesday, a new guy tries. A young Lucchese associate who doesn't know better. Casso looks up, finishes chewing, and says, "You want to eat here? You bring a eulogy." The kid leaves without touching his sandwich. Casso doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. His tone is enough. His pauses say more than most people's speeches, and he's growing more strategic. He begins rotating his top men between boroughs, keeping them from getting too comfortable. He moves loan operations out of their usual zones, disguises muscle jobs as repossessions, even has a few guys take actual jobs in city construction for cover. At this point, The line between legal and illegal starts to blur for his crew. They attend safety meetings. They pay union dues. They wear hard hats. But beneath the orange vests are silencers. And beneath the payroll records are ledgers written in memory. Casso also starts to tap into new financial veins. Extortion schemes involving air freight at JFK Airport. It's not glamorous, but the money is clean. Predictable. Weekly, he has control over which packages get delayed, which warehouses lose power for a few critical hours, which inspectors suddenly find something worth looking into. It's not just crime anymore, it's management. And all this while maintaining a strange, disciplined home life. His children are teenagers now. He shows up for birthdays, still watches the news with his mother, still brings Lillian coffee every morning, still folds his suits meticulously, never has a hair out of place. But no one knows where he really goes after midnight. There are rumors, safe houses, tunnels, apartments with soundproof walls. Maybe all true, maybe none of it. There's a story from this time. A small-time bookmaker named Ray gets into trouble with a rival family. He's a Lucchese earner, but expendable. Still, he begs for help. Casso agrees to a meeting. They sit in the back of a bakery. Ray's shaking. Casso doesn't speak for the first 5 minutes, just watches the clock, then finally says, "You ever see a muffin explode?" Ray blinks. "No." "Good," Casso says. "Let's keep it that way." Ray survives, moves to Staten Island, opens a car wash, and never bets again. That's how it works now. Casso doesn't need threats. He implies danger like a fog implies rain. You don't see it fall, but you feel it sink into your skin. By the end of 1989, his command is undeniable. He's the cold whisper behind every hit, every envelope, every favor. But shadows stretch when the light moves, and somewhere behind the closed doors and buried safe deposit keys, a new question begins to form. What happens when the quietest man in the room becomes the loudest on the wire? By the time 1990 dawns, Anthony Gaspipe Casso is less a man and more a phenomenon, one that seeps into every crevice of New York's criminal architecture. His presence is now measured not just in orders or violence, but in pauses, in names that don't get mentioned, in calls that don't get returned, in the way certain guys look at the floor when someone asks, "You hear from Gaspipe lately?" Because by now, even silence has started to answer for him. Casso has perfected his empire of erasure, not just killing people, but unmaking them. Paper trails vanish. Surveillance goes cold. Lawyers refuse to speculate. And somewhere in the city, a man is driving home, staring into his rearview mirror, wondering if his last words were already said. But despite all the mythos, Casso is still very much hands-on. He doesn't hide in fortresses or retreat into luxury. He walks streets, makes appearances, reads building permits, even shows up to inspect delivery docks. He's the kind of boss who could order your death before breakfast, then give your nephew a job by lunch. This year, he begins consolidating operations with a new kind of urgency. He senses something shifting, not in his own position, but in the air around it. The FBI has been watching organized crime more methodically. The RICO statutes are evolving, and the sentencing is getting harsher. Rats are climbing out of holes faster than before, so Casso doubles down on control. He starts installing redundancies: 2 drivers, 2 couriers, 2 clean houses. He rotates meetups, alters routines, and adds an entirely new set of ghost earners, men who work under no official crew, directly tied only to him. His setup protects him, but it also begins to isolate him. There's a weight to that, a knowing. He starts to see shadows even where there aren't any. A car parked too long. A stranger at the corner bodega. A missed call from a guy who never misses calls. And then there's the money. The Lucchese coffers are overflowing. thanks in no small part to Gaspipe's ruthless efficiency. The Brooklyn Ledger alone is bringing in hundreds of thousands monthly. Add the JFK air cargo schemes, the loan sharking routes, the construction kickbacks, the ghost trucking outfits, and you've got an operation too big to audit, too thick to fold. But even money has a smell, and that smell is starting to drift toward the feds. Casso's solution? More insulation. He starts using intermediaries even for minor tasks. As drivers hand off notes to a guy, who then delivers to another guy, who then takes it across town. Nothing travels direct. No one gets to say, "He told me," because technically, he didn't. Many people still think that this level of secrecy was paranoia, that by 1990, Casso was unraveling, afraid of shadows of his own making. Others insist it was brilliance, that his caution kept him free years longer than most mob bosses. So what do you think? Did Gaspipe see the cracks forming, or did he start hammering at the walls himself? In April of that year, something shifts. There's a hit, a messy one. A Gambino-connected man named Louis Batts is found in a Queens alley, shot in the face, his pockets turned out, his mouth stuffed with $10 bills. The press labels it a message. The FBI thinks it's Lucchese, but internally, no one claims it. Casso is asked if it was one of his jobs. He doesn't blink, just says, "That wasn't a message. That was a receipt." What it means is unclear, but no one asks him to explain. Meanwhile, Vic Amuso, still technically boss, is feeling the heat. Indictments are getting closer. Associates are flipping. Wiretaps are getting more specific. So he does what many do when the walls start whispering. He runs. Amuso goes on the lam. Disappears. He believes it's temporary, strategic. But what it really does is leave a void. And that void has Casso's silhouette stamped inside it. He steps up, quietly, without ceremony, without title. But everyone knows who's boss now. And Casso, well, he's not interested in pretending otherwise. He begins issuing orders directly, starts reorganizing the family's ranks. Those who were loyal to Amuso are carefully observed. Those who seemed too slow to respond, removed. Not always fatally, but always permanently. One guy, a long-time Lucchese earner, gets reassigned to Florida operations. There are no Florida operations. He finds out halfway through his drive south when his gas card gets declined and his contact stops answering. Gone, like the wind. And then there's the accountant incident. A low-profile guy, middle-aged, good with books, starts noticing some odd entries. Quietly asks questions. Wonders why certain fund logs are off by just enough to matter. Casso hears about it that evening. The man's body is found 3 weeks later in a storm drain. Face down, his wedding ring still on. No signs of struggle. No theft. Just removed. There's no autopsy request from the family. No service. Just silence. Because everyone understands, by the fall of 1990, Casso is ruling a kingdom of ghosts. He communicates less and less, uses cutouts, never touches the same doorknob twice, starts talking in code that only he understands, half sentences, gestures, the curl of a finger, the tilt of a watch. One Lucchese associate describes it like this: Gaspipe didn't just know how to vanish. He taught everyone around him how to pretend they were never there. But beneath the stillness, something's stirring. The feds are building cases. Quiet ones. Not just RICO anymore, but full conspiracy webs. They've begun to map his movements, not directly, but through patterns. Arrests in Queens, intercepts in Staten Island. A certain phone line always buzzing 20 minutes before a body drops. And while Casso's fortress still stands, it's beginning to creak in the corners. He doesn't say it, but he knows it. And that's when he starts preparing to disappear. The winter of 1990 arrives not with snow, but with suspicion. Cold, damp tension clings to Brooklyn's backstreets like fog, and everyone close to the Lucchese family knows something's about to snap. Anthony Casso, ever the architect of silence, is building something different now. Not another crew or scam, but an exit strategy. He doesn't say it aloud. He never would. But the signs are there. For starters, his presence begins to flicker. One week, he's everywhere. Meetings, quiet lunches, drive-bys of union job sites. The next week, nothing. No sightings, no calls, a different car at the club, a different man answering the phone. Everyone chalks it up to routine. But the veterans, they feel it in their bones. Gaspipe is withdrawing, and still, business thrives. The Brooklyn ledger continues humming, untouched. His teams remain efficient. Loans go out, payments come in, contractors get what they need. Rivals vanish with barely a whisper. On the surface, it all looks calm, but underneath, Anthony is folding up the map. He begins liquidating assets, not obviously, not publicly, but piece by piece. A warehouse burns accidentally in Red Hook. The insurance is processed smoothly, the claim oddly efficient. A vending machine company closes due to staffing shortages. Its books vanish. Its trucks are sold to a cousin in Jersey who doesn't exist. And then, most notably, several safe houses he's kept untouched for years suddenly go cold. Phones disconnected, food left half-eaten, furniture removed, not hastily, but with intent, like someone turning off the lights on a party before the music ends. In the middle of all this, he remains meticulous. He keeps his rituals going, because breaking them would draw attention. He still calls his mother every Sunday, still brings flowers to Lillian, still walks 3 blocks out of his way to avoid a public trash bin he's always hated. But everything else? Tightened, polished, ready for distance. And the paranoia, well, it's grown sharper. He stops using payphones completely, only speaks in parked cars or near water. Once, during a low-level sit-down about a hijacking issue in Queens, he abruptly cancels when he sees a man in a parked Buick reading a newspaper. Too still, too calm. Turns out the man really was just reading. Still, the meeting is never rescheduled, because in Casso's world, even truth can't be trusted if it moves too quietly. Around this time, an old associate named Freddie starts pushing for more responsibility. He's been loyal, effective, but lately, he's gotten bolder, asking questions that don't need answers. Casso hears the reports, doesn't respond. Then one day, Freddie's car is found with the engine still running in the parking lot of a deli. Door open. No signs of struggle. Just an empty driver's seat and a warm cup of coffee in the console. Freddie's name is never mentioned again. Many people still think that Freddie was taken out because he asked the wrong question. Others believe it was just timing, that Casso was already tying off old threads and Freddie was one of them. So what do you think? Was it personal or just arithmetic? The FBI is moving closer now. Their files are getting thicker. Their names more accurate. Wiretaps have begun to link Casso to specific dates, meetings, faces. Still circumstantial, but it's growing. Surveillance teams are circling like sharks that have smelled a drop of old blood, and Casso knows it. He reads reports passed to him through his detective pipeline. Notes about grand juries, sealed indictments, voice samples being compared against old wire audio. One report mentions a subpoena that includes a list of names, 8 of them. 3 are already dead. 2 have fled the country. The last 3, one of them is his, Anthony Salvatore Casso. He doesn't panic. He pivots. He starts spending more time in Jersey. Not the public-facing parts, but the quiet neighborhoods. The kind with older homes and fewer street cameras. Places where neighbors wave but don't ask where you work. He sets up a temporary residence under a false name. Michael Garibaldi. Nice ring to it. Respectable. Forgettable. He uses the time to clean. Old ledgers gone. Backup contact sheets destroyed. One burner phone, used for almost a decade, is dropped into the East River on a cloudy Tuesday without ceremony. Just a soft plunk and a long walk home. There's one meeting during this period that stands out. A mid-level earner named Polly asks to meet face-to-face. He says it's important, urgent. Casso agrees. They sit in a parked car, windows fogged, heater on low. Polly asks, "Are we safe?" Casso looks at him, blinks once, then asks, "You mean you and me?" Polly nods. Casso doesn't answer, just opens the car door and steps out. Polly understands. He never asks again. And yet, Casso's grip doesn't loosen. That's the paradox. Even as he prepares to vanish, his control sharpens. He's trimming fat, not retreating. He's not running, not yet. He's closing circles, making sure when he does move, no one can follow. But behind it all, there's a weight growing, a heaviness that even Gaspipe can't shake. The streets have changed. The rules have bent too far. The new guys don't respect quiet. They respect headlines, flash. They don't know how to disappear, only how to be seen. And Anthony? He was never made for being seen, so he does the one thing no one expects. He starts preparing for silence, not the kind he sends to others, but the kind that takes him away. As 1991 creeps in, Anthony Casso becomes something more than a fugitive in waiting. He becomes an absence with intent. The streets feel it first, not with sirens or splashed headlines, but with strange quiet. Certain doors stop opening. Certain phones stop ringing. Crews that used to report weekly now send word through one-liners scribbled on napkins and passed via sandwich bags. The machinery is still turning, but the engineer is off-site. It starts officially in January. With sealed indictments closing in and Vic Amuso already underground, Casso finally joins him in the wind. But unlike Amuso, who fumbles through hiding like a man living on borrowed time, Gaspipe disappears like someone who never existed to begin with. There's no panic, no public escape, just absence. Like a man folding himself between bricks, he uses a small apartment in Mount Olive, New Jersey. Plain, brown bricked, with drawn blinds and a faint smell of dust and fried onions. No visitors, no calls, only a radio, a few worn books, and a carefully prepared exit bag stashed under a loose floorboard. He doesn't leave often, and when he does, it's calculated. Always alone, always gloved. No patterns, no rhythm, and still, his influence grows. From exile, Casso continues to orchestrate the Lucchese family's most important moves. He communicates through a double-layer system. Handwritten messages passed to runners, who memorize them, burn them, and relay the contents to only one trusted soldier at a time. No phones, no handwriting survives. He also takes advantage of the panic his disappearance creates. Some capos think he's dead. Others think he's been arrested quietly. Still others believe he's in Europe, sipping espresso on a terrace. The uncertainty itself becomes a tool, a powerful one, because no one wants to act out of line when Gaspipe might still be listening. Many people still think this was his most strategic period, when he held the entire family together without ever picking up a phone. Others claim he lost touch, that in hiding, he became unmoored, and the crew began to fracture without his visible hand. So what do you think? Did he lose his grip, or master it remotely? Meanwhile, Law enforcement tightens the noose. The FBI and NYPD collaborate across boroughs, pulling in low-level earners, squeezing family accountants, and offering sweetened plea deals to anyone with even a whisper of contact with Casso. They're not even subtle anymore. They want him, and they want him bad, but Gaspipe stays ahead. Barely. Like a shadow slipping across windows just before dawn. Then comes the Garden City slip, a Lucchese associate, one of the few who still knows Casso's face in real time, gets pulled in on an unrelated charge, a gun rap. Should have been simple, but the guy talks, not specifics, just breadcrumbs, mentions a house, a routine, a quiet setup in Jersey, and suddenly the FBI has a direction. Casso gets the warning late, too late. On August 16, 1993, after 2 years on the run, agents descend on his Mount Olive safe house. He doesn't fight, he doesn't run. He answers the door in house slippers, holding a newspaper. As the cuffs close around his wrists, one agent asks, "You know what we're here for?" Casso, ever calm, replies, "You already do, or you wouldn't be here." They search the apartment, find envelopes of cash, a pistol tucked behind a radiator, a list of alias names in the freezer written on bakery paper, and near his mattress, a single, unopened envelope labeled, "For when it's over." They never reveal what was inside. From the moment of his arrest, the myth begins to crack, but not entirely, because everyone's asking the same thing. Will he talk? And if he does, who survives it? At first, Casso plays the old script. He's silent, respectful, wears his indictment like a tailored suit, faces his arraignment without blinking. But something's different now. Something is worn. And then quietly, he signals to the feds. He wants to talk. The underworld reels, because this isn't just another rat. This is Gaspipe. This is the whisper turning into a testimony. The feds, at first, think they've struck gold. He offers details no one could know. Tells them about buried bodies, about judges leaned on through third cousins, about union votes bought with envelopes left in glove boxes. And worst of all, he confirms the NYPD mole program. He names Ippolito and Caracappa, dirty cops moonlighting as hitmen. For investigators, it's explosive. They barely sleep for weeks. They record everything, build cases, outline trees, connect dots. But as time passes, things begin to unravel. Casso's stories shift. His moods twist. He offers one version, then another, sometimes smug, sometimes reflective, sometimes furious. It becomes hard to tell if he's unburdening truth or playing one final game of chess. Eventually, the feds cut him loose from their side. He's dropped from the witness protection program. Officially, they label him unreliable. Off the record, they call him the most dangerous man they ever tried to trust. Still, damage is done. The Lucchese family splinters. The NYPD corruption scandal erupts. Careers are ended. And somewhere in all of this, the man who once ruled Brooklyn with a nod and a cigarette now sits in a federal holding cell, staring at white walls that don't flinch. He doesn't talk much anymore, not that anyone expects him to, but the guards swear he hums, sometimes show tunes, sometimes opera, sometimes just silence. By 1994, Anthony Gaspipe Casso has become an institutional anomaly, neither fully a mobster nor fully an informant, floating in the strange purgatory of federal custody. He's living in a kind of high-security limbo, surrounded by concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and guards who've read his file twice, but still glance over their shoulder when he walks by. He's not cuffed like the others. He's not feared like he was in the streets. But there's still a hesitation around him, because everyone remembers what he was. And they know it doesn't just disappear. In his first year behind bars, he makes himself comfortable in his own peculiar way, keeps his bunk spotless, folds his sheets perfectly, eats slowly, reads constantly, requests old maps of Brooklyn, not updated ones, but historical ones that show where buildings used to be. That's the kind of thing he stares at for hours. He rarely talks unless spoken to, but when he does speak, the voice is the same, measured, low, like a man explaining the weather before a storm. In those early months, the feds still try to make use of him. There's a hope that maybe, just maybe, he'll find stability and become a consistent witness. And at first, it looks promising. He delivers facts, testifies about construction rackets, bribery chains, the layers of insulation between bosses and blood. He maps out the Lucchese internal structure like he's drawing a subway map. Stations, switches, hidden tunnels. But then, as always, Casso complicates the narrative. He starts contradicting himself. Not overtly, not loudly, just subtly. He tells one agent that a killing in 1984 was authorized by a Musso, then later says he ordered it himself. He names a hitman, then calls him unreliable. He floats a new theory about a missing witness, one that's unverifiable and clearly theatrical. It's not clear if he's confused, manipulative, or simply bored. What is clear, though, is that the government begins to back away. They stop asking for meetings, reduce his debriefings. Eventually, they strip him of cooperation status. It's a rare thing, an informant being fired. But then again, Casso's never fit the mold. Many people still think that Casso sabotaged himself on purpose, that he didn't want to be a rat, not truly, but used it as one final act of control. Others argue he couldn't help it, that his instinct to manipulate outweighed his instinct to survive. So what do you think? Was he playing both sides? Or was the silence finally catching up? After that, prison becomes normal. He's transferred to the Florence ADX Supermax, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place built for the men the world has no idea what to do with. Terrorists, cartel heads, lone wolves, traitors, and Gaspipe. His days become routine. Wake at 6, walk the small concrete cell, eat, read, think, sleep. He requests no visitors, writes few letters, refuses interviews. He becomes, once again, a ghost. But now, in a cage, the guards observe him quietly. Some are fascinated, others are unnerved. He's polite, never raises his voice, occasionally makes jokes, dry, biting ones. Once, when asked what he misses most about the outside, he responds, parking. And yet, even here the myth clings to him. New inmates whisper his name down the halls. Younger guys, wannabe wise guys, write him letters, asking for advice, guidance, respect. He ignores most of them. Occasionally he replies. One note scrawled in pencil on a commissary receipt reads simply, "It's not the blood you spill that matters. It's the memory you leave behind it." One inmate says Casso's the only man he's seen smile without smiling. It's like he knows something about you you're not ready to admit. And then, the silence deepens. His health starts to fail. Slowly at first. High blood pressure. Arthritis in his knuckles. The years of tension and internal combustion finally taking their toll. He stops reading. Sleeps longer, requests fewer things, but he never breaks. He never confesses. He never explains. By 2000, he's been effectively erased from most public conversations. The mob world has moved on. New bosses rise, old ones die, some go legit. But Casso, he remains frozen in a timeline no longer ticking. Every now and then, a true crime show name drops him. a former Lucchese underboss turned unreliable witness. A quick montage of mugshots and blurred court sketches. But there's no interview. No final confession tape. No documentary sit-down. Just silence. In 2006, he's briefly mentioned in a racketeering trial. The lawyer calls him an untrustworthy ghost of a more violent time. The court nods. The defense rests. And still, behind that steel door and concrete slab, Anthony Casso breathes. One night, a new guard, young, fresh out of training, makes the mistake of asking him what it was like to be feared by an entire city. Casso looks at him for a long time, then says, "You ever hold your breath underwater so long you forget you're drowning?" The guard doesn't ask again. Back in New York, the streets he once controlled are different now. Glass towers stand where old clubs used to be. The docks have gone clean. The unions, at least on paper, run without envelopes. The kids on the corners don't know his name, but in the right bars, if you ask quietly enough, someone might still say it. Gaspipe. Not with reverence, not with fear, just with memory, the kind that doesn't fade. By the mid-2000s, Anthony Gaspipe Casso has become more myth than man. Inside Florence ADX, the days blur like dried ink. His name, once etched into backroom walls and spoken only behind hands, is now just another entry on a Bureau of Prisons roster. Inmate 04166, Louis 92. No titles, no empire, no foot soldiers, but even ghosts have shadows. In interviews with former mobsters, the name still surfaces, reluctantly, respectfully, like an unhealed scar. Gaspipe, they'd say. You didn't cross him. You didn't even approach him unless he called for you. No one talks about his smile, because no one remembers him smiling. He doesn't get visitors, not from family, not from former allies, not even from prosecutors, which suits him fine. He spends most of his time in his cell. It's small, 7 by 12 feet, a concrete bench, a steel toilet, a narrow slit for sunlight. Sometimes at sunrise, a gold band of light creeps across the floor like a silent guard shift. And Casso, he just watches it, doesn't move, doesn't speak. He keeps a few books, mostly history. Joy Tourne memoirs, political biographies. Once in a while, something about architecture. His favorite is an old paperback about underground tunnels in ancient cities. He reads it slowly, carefully, then folds it shut and rests it on the shelf like it's a family photo. The guards say he hums sometimes, low and steady, a patternless rhythm that feels more like habit than song. When asked about it, he says, "It helps me know I'm still here." He doesn't talk about the past, not unless cornered, and even then his stories are clipped, devoid of drama. If asked about a name, he'll nod. If asked about a hit, he'll shrug. The only time he ever raised his voice was when someone referred to him as a thug. He didn't shout, but the tone cut through 2 walls. "I wasn't a thug," he said. "I was a manager of outcomes." He got extra yard time for good behavior that week, didn't use it. In 2010, he develops a mild heart condition. Nothing sudden, just the slow tug of time. He starts refusing heavy meals, doesn't want dessert, requests decaf. The nurses note his blood pressure fluctuates wildly, but he never complains. When another inmate dies, quietly, overnight, Casso doesn't react. He doesn't ask who. He doesn't look up. He just adjusts his pillow and returns to sleep. Because for him, death is no longer surprising. It's routine. Still, there's one thing he holds on to: control. He arranges his bunk every morning the same way he used to arrange meetings. Tight corners, clean lines, nothing out of place. His shoes point toward the door. His books stay alphabetical. Even his soap is carved to a flat edge. It's not obsession, it's discipline. because in a place where time melts and identity blurs, order is the last power he has left. Occasionally, young inmates try to talk to him. A few know the legend. They ask about hits, about deals, about the golden age of New York crime. Casso listens, then says only one thing. The golden age was quiet. You're talking too much. One inmate writes to a journalist years later saying, Gaspipe didn't teach. He warned. Every word was a caution sign, not a lesson. Many people still think that Casso used prison as a new form of control, a final stage of managing perception from behind steel. Others believe he had nothing left to give. That silence, at last, became survival. So what do you think? Did Gaspipe master the end game, or just outlive the board? The last years of his life fade like steam on glass. He loses weight, moves slower. His arthritis gets worse. He refuses pain meds, says they slow the mind, and the mind's the only thing still walking. In 2020, the pandemic reaches the prison. Staff rotate, protocols change, fear creeps into the hallways like fog. Casso, now 78, catches the virus in November. He doesn't panic, doesn't ask for help. When the coughs start, he paces slowly, arms crossed behind his back like he's walking through Bensonhurst again, counting sidewalk cracks, listening for betrayal. He's transferred to a medical facility. They try to stabilize him. Oxygen, fluids, silence. He doesn't resist. On December 15th, 2020, Anthony Casso dies in federal custody. No family is present, no priest, no final rites. Just a line in a report, a checkbox next to deceased. There's no funeral, no service, just cremation. His ashes are never claimed. But back in Brooklyn, a man once close to him lights a candle in a small apartment. Doesn't say a word, just watches the flame for 20 minutes, then snuffs it out with 2 fingers, because some men leave behind memoirs, and some men leave behind shadows. Casso was never built for goodbyes. He was the silence between footsteps, the whisper between heartbeats, the chill in the room before a decision gets made. And now, that silence finally rests. There's something eerie about a legacy that outlives a voice. After Anthony Casso's death in late 2020, the name Gaspipe doesn't vanish. It drifts, lingers, no longer screamed in courtrooms or muttered in back rooms, but instead floating through podcasts, footnotes in FBI reports, whispered between the old men still alive to remember when fear had a face and a fixed address in Brooklyn. And in those whispers, one question always hovers. How did he do it? Because Casso wasn't just feared, he was understood by very few. A man who could dismantle an empire without ever raising his voice. A man who made people disappear without lifting a finger. A man who ran one of the most complex criminal systems in New York from behind a curtain. And later, from behind bars. The answer isn't simple. It begins, perhaps, with that singular truth. Anthony Casso watched. He noticed. He remembered. He didn't rule with charm or charisma. He ruled with calculation. He remembered who owed him $50 in 1971. He remembered who coughed before a meeting in 1984. He noticed who glanced at the exits too often. And once you were on the map in his mind, you never came off. That memory became his greatest weapon, and, some would argue, his eventual prison. Because when you remember everything, you never truly rest. In the years after his death, law enforcement would revisit his case files. Analysts would try to repiece timelines. Biographers would pitch proposals. But there's no one left to verify most of it. Casso's closest confidants are dead, missing, or buried under new identities. And those who do remain, they don't talk, because talking was always dangerous when Gaspipe was alive. And now that he's gone, it still feels like bad luck. One prosecutor, long retired, once said, With Casso, you never felt like you were catching up to him. You felt like he let you get close, just to remind you who was really in control. And the numbers back it up. Over 30 confirmed murders tied to his orders, many more suspected. Millions laundered through fake construction projects, trucking fronts, and union scams. Dozens of corrupt public officials either suspected or quietly shifted out of position. A blueprint not of chaos, but of engineered crime. Yet, in all this machinery, there's no record of him ever laughing, no stories of grand celebration, no mistresses paraded around clubs, no drunken confessions, just precision. Even his flaws were intentional. He knew when to intimidate. He knew when to step back. He even knew, arguably, when to fail, to give the government enough to think they had a hold on him, before slipping back into uncooperative silence. There's an old guard now, those retired Lucchese men who live in Florida condos or upstate cabins, well into their 70s and 80s. Once in a while, someone brings up Casso. They never raise their voice when they do. One old capo put it this way, sipping whiskey on a porch. We had guys who could kill. We had guys who could lead. Tony could erase. There's a difference, and maybe that's the real legacy. Because Gaspipe didn't just make people disappear. He made memory dangerous. He made knowing too much feel like a death sentence. He created a world where silence wasn't golden. It was enforced. And after his death, you'd expect things to loosen, for the tension to lift. But it doesn't. Even the young generation, kids who never knew his name when he was active, feel it. They hear the stories, read the articles. Try to imagine a man who didn't need the limelight to be the most powerful voice in the room. A man who never smiled in photos. A man who folded his napkin the same way, even at home. A man who wrote no memoir, who left no last words, and who answered every question with the same shrug, the same pause, the same deadly lack of drama. And so today he lives in fragments, a line in a documentary, a reference in a court file, a rumor in an aging bartender's recollection. But those fragments still hold power, because unlike the gangsters who wanted to be seen in newspapers or remembered through Hollywood, Casso never asked to be remembered at all, which is exactly why he is. Many people still think that Gaspipe was the last of a breed, the final craftsman of old-world fear in a new-world city. Others say he was simply a man shaped by colder systems. So what do you think? Was he the ghost of a dying empire, or its final architect? One last story told by a former FBI agent. During a debriefing session, a younger agent asked Casso what scared him most. Casso looked up, blinked once, and said, "Being misunderstood was safer than being known." And then, he didn't speak again for hours. By the time the 2010s arrive in full, Anthony Casso is locked away deeper than most men can imagine, physically, mentally, and mythologically. His influence has long since stopped shaping the streets, but the architecture he helped build still stands. You can't walk a few blocks through Brooklyn without someone driving past a shuttered deli or an old construction site and muttering, "That used to be gas pipes." Used to be. Those two words trail behind his legacy like smoke. He's no longer part of any active criminal investigation. The Lucchese family has reshuffled, rebranded, and, in some corners, gone legitimate. New capos rise who never knew Casso personally. Their underlings might recognize the name, but only in passing, like a myth scribbled in the margins of a newspaper they don't subscribe to. And yet, whenever an old crew member gets arrested, or a new book hits the shelves, or a wiretap catches a whisper in a quiet room, his name surfaces, still, and it lands like a dropped gun. In prison, Casso becomes even more of a recluse. Not from fear, from calculation. There's nothing left to win. No crew to protect. No operation to sustain. The quiet, in its final form, is now his refuge. He declines interviews, refuses book offers, doesn't answer letters. One journalist, in a last-ditch attempt, sends a handwritten letter to ADX Florence. 6 months later, he receives it back, unopened. But something's changed. Taped to the envelope is a scrap of yellow paper with a single sentence scrawled in block letters. If it's silence you want to write about, don't break it. No signature, but none needed. Many people still think that Casso remained a threat until his last breath, that he still knew things about bodies, about betrayals, about dirty money that had gone clean and respectable. Others argue that time finally dulled him, that even the sharpest blades rust in the dark. So what do you think? Was he still dangerous, or simply preserved? Around 2013, Casso's health declines sharply. Diabetes, high blood pressure, congestive heart issues. His once disciplined body is no longer in sync with the mind behind it. He starts using a cane, then a wheelchair. His steps, once precise and deliberate, become hesitant. Still, his habits remain intact. He wakes before dawn, makes his bed, reads for precisely 90 minutes a day, never accepts more than he needs from the commissary. When a new guard offers him extra coffee once, he refuses without speaking. Just slides the cup back and returns to his seat. This is a man who never owed anyone anything he didn't intend to. The silence around him becomes a kind of respect. Even the most hardened inmates tread lightly near his cell. They know who he was. They don't need to know more. But every now and then someone asks. A younger guy, new to the unit, leans over in the yard and says, "You're Gaspipe, right?" Casso looks at him, doesn't answer, just asks, "You hear that?" "Hear what?" Casso closes his eyes. Exactly. That's the end of the conversation. He doesn't deal in nostalgia. There's no fondness for the old days. He doesn't pine for smoke-filled clubs or backroom sit-downs. In fact, he avoids talk of it altogether. The past, to him, isn't sentimental. It's recorded. He remembers every detail, but he chooses not to revisit them because he knows. The minute he speaks them aloud, they start belonging to someone else. And that's something Gaspipe never allowed. He starts writing again. Not letters, but notes, thoughts, observations, cryptic passages about systems, about trust, about things that no longer exist. None of them are mailed. They stay locked in a folder, which he stores under his mattress. Guards glance at it, but never touch it. One entry reads, "The quiet ones knew." Not because they were smarter, but because they listened longer. Another, "Power never leaves. It just pretends to forget where it came from." Even the guards, rotated every few months, begin to pass along stories. He never curses. He knows what time it is without looking. He folds his paper towels like napkins. These details trickle out and circulate through correctional grapevines like campfire tales. In 2016, a podcast briefly revives his name. The episode is titled "The Cold Whisper of Brooklyn." It garners thousands of listens. Younger audiences comment, fascinated by the idea of a gangster who never wanted fame, who never left a quote for the press, who never made a scene. Casso's name trends for all of 12 hours, then disappears again. He never hears the episode. He wouldn't have cared anyway. By 2018, he's one of the longest-held mafia figures in the federal system. No parole, no appeals, just time, uncounted and unconcerned. He's asked once by a nurse during a checkup, "Mr. Casso, what keeps you going?" He blinks slowly, then says, "You don't go. You stay until they move the chair." She doesn't ask again, because Anthony Casso doesn't believe in endings, only closures, quiet ones. No headlines, no funerals, no parting statements. just a slow fade into that final unspoken silence he carried with him all along. And somewhere in the layers of Brooklyn concrete, beneath fresh paint and new apartments, a silence lingers, and people still don't talk about him. Not because they've forgotten, but because they remember too well. The final years of Anthony Gaspipe Casso's life become a masterclass in disciplined vanishing. Not the kind pulled off by fake passports or private jets, but the slow, deliberate erasure of a man from every conversation he once commanded. He is no longer a player in any current criminal case. His testimony has long been discarded. His enemies, mostly buried or broken, no longer matter. His allies, either silent or dead, and Casso himself, still breathing, still invisible. Even inside ADX Florence, a prison designed for the country's most dangerous, most volatile men, he carries an aura of static calm. Guards no longer refer to him as a former mobster or a turncoat. He's just Casso, not a threat, not a relic, just a presence. But that presence never becomes soft. He still walks with measured steps, even with a cane. Still arranges his books alphabetically. Still waits exactly 22 seconds before answering a question. Some call it ritual, others call it reflex. But those who watch him know the truth. He's still listening. He keeps his mind sharp, refuses television except for Sunday news segments, watches quietly, never comments, just observes. If he hears his name, he blinks once, never twice, never says a word. By 2019, his body has slowed, but his gaze hasn't. Medical staff note his vitals fluctuate unpredictably, rising when guards enter unannounced, steadying when left alone. His blood pressure reflects awareness, not anxiety, like his body responds only to relevance. And then, the letters return. Some arrive from the outside, true crime fans, law students, men trying to revive the old ways. They ask for clarification, for truth, for confession. He answers none of them, but he keeps every envelope. Not the contents, just the envelopes, stacked neatly in a drawer, rubber banded and labeled by month. No one knows why, until a guard, in a rare moment of candor, asks him, "Why keep them if you're not going to answer?" Casso replies, "Because every name's a confession. They just don't know it yet." The guard requests reassignment 2 weeks later. Many people still think that. Even in custody, Casso was gathering names, intentions, information. That even with no crew to run, no streets to manage, he was still collecting shadows. Others believe he was just clinging to routine, an old predator watching the jungle he no longer hunts. So what do you think? Was he keeping score, or simply marking time? There's one more incident. A correctional officer drops a tray during lunch. The clang echoes sharply. Most inmates ignore it. Casso, halfway through a soft-boiled egg, doesn't flinch. He murmurs without turning his head. Carelessness always starts with noise. The officer doesn't understand. But a week later, he's caught breaking procedure on another inmate's cell check. Transferred. Again, no proof, just coincidence. But in Casso's world, coincidence never stood alone. As his health worsens, the staff notice something odd. He never asks for anything. No pain meds, no favors, no visits, no comfort. Just his books, his folded towel, his silence. And then, in late 2020, COVID-19 sweeps through the federal prison system like wildfire. Entire blocks are locked down. Inmates cough through the nights. Guards wear masks, gloves, and wide eyes. Everyone is exposed. Everyone is vulnerable, even Gaspipe. On November 5th, he tests positive. His temperature spikes. Breathing becomes shallow. But he refuses to be put on a ventilator. Refuses transfer at first. Finally, he's taken to a federal medical center in North Carolina. It's quiet there. Sterile. Pale walls and the hiss of machines. Doctors try, but he fades quickly. During his final hours, a nurse reports hearing him whisper something repeatedly under his breath. Not names, not regrets. Just one word. Forget. She asks him gently. Forget what? But he doesn't respond. On December 15, 2020, at 3:52 a.m., Anthony Salvatore Casso dies. No statement is issued. No obituary runs in the New York Times. His body is cremated, his ashes unclaimed, and the world moves on, or tries to, because legends, especially the dark ones, don't ask to be remembered. They leak into memory. They cling to old documents, surface in stories told too close to closing time. Live in the way someone lowers their voice mid-sentence, and in Brooklyn, there are still corners where the name Gaspipe carries weight, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a quiet, grim acknowledgement that some shadows don't fade. They wait even after death. Anthony Gaspipe Casso's story doesn't settle. It lingers in court records, in basement conversations, in the footnotes of true crime books where his name is never the headline, but always the most troubling character in the cast. He is not romanticized, not mythologized like Gotti. He doesn't get Hollywood. He doesn't get redemption. What he gets is gravity. You hear his name, and something shifts. You don't smile. You pause. Years after his passing, law enforcement continues to parse the debris of his life. Case files remain open, not to chase him, but to understand how he did it. How he maintained a reign so cold, so efficient, so far-reaching, without ever holding a formal throne. Investigators revisit wiretaps from the late 80s and early 90s. They listen again, not for the loud men, but for the pauses, the names not spoken, the questions not asked. Because in Casso's world, what wasn't said was more important than what was, and what they find is unsettling. Patterns, codes, voice prints that were never matched. A second layer of communication embedded inside the silence. One analyst writes in a private memo, "If Casso was playing chess, most of us were still learning how the board fit in the box." In mob circles, even the next generation whispers about him. Sons of soldiers who grew up hearing his name without context now look him up, expecting splashy photos or courtroom antics. Instead, they find a blank space. No interviews, no memoirs, no last words. Just documents, numbers, the odd photograph, always unsmiling, always neat. There's one from 1986 where he's walking out of a restaurant in Brooklyn. Coat folded over his arm, eyes scanning something outside the frame. It's the only candid photo anyone seems to have, and even in that, he looks like a man calculating outcomes. Many people still think that Casso's greatest weapon wasn't fear, it was foresight, that he understood the system so deeply, he began shaping its failure from within. Others say he simply trusted no one, and in the end, was right to do so. So, what do you think? Was he a tactician, or a survivor too good to last? A retired mob lawyer, in an off-the-record interview, says this: "The thing with Gaspipe was, he never reacted. You'd come at him loud, and he'd look at you like a waiter waiting for your order to make sense. And maybe that's why the silence around him remains, because people still don't know what they're waiting for. Even the government struggles with how to write the final word." His file, over 3,000 pages thick, ends with a medical examiner's note: "Deceased, no known survivors, no next of kin contact, ashes unclaimed." That final sentence says more than any eulogy. It means he outlived not just his enemies, but his allies, his family, and the version of himself that the world feared. And yet, pieces of him remain in neighborhoods that never fully shed the scent of their past, in judges who still flinch when a case echoes his tactics, in young investigators who find his trail and think, how? In 2022, a podcast host interviews 3 retired FBI agents who worked cases connected to Casso. At the end, they're asked, if you could ask him one question, what would it be? The first says, I'd ask if he ever regretted flipping. The second, I'd ask who he feared, if anyone. The third pauses, then says, I'd ask what we missed. And the truth? They missed a lot. Because for all their taps and trackers and tapes, the one thing they never captured was the inner voice of Anthony Casso. He never wrote a diary, never spoke publicly, never laid out a philosophy. But if you watched closely, you could glimpse it in his routines, in the way he folded his coat, counted stairs, lined up shoes at a safe house before leaving it behind forever. A man like that doesn't need to speak his truth. He lives it, quietly, repeatedly, without error. And now, with him gone, that silence becomes a story in itself, one that won't ever go viral, one that won't get optioned for TV, but one that stays in the concrete, in the file drawers, in the sentences that trail off when someone says, you ever hear what happened to Gaspipe? Because even in death, the pause after his name is still the most dangerous part. In the years that follow Anthony Casso's death, his name doesn't echo. It drifts. Not loud, not clear, but persistent, like a fog rolling through forgotten avenues. People don't tell stories about him the way they do about the flamboyant dons or the hot-headed cowboys of the 5 families. No, Gaspipe stories are told differently, leaned into, spoken low, often cut short with a shrug and a look toward the door. He didn't leave behind a signature cocktail. No mistresses with tell-all books. No grainy courtroom rants on YouTube. He left behind questions like, how did he manage to direct murders from hiding for years without a single word caught on tape? Or, how many people worked for him without knowing they were? Or, more quietly, what else did he know that he never told anyone? One former Lucchese associate, now in witness protection, once muttered in a closed deposition, Gaspipe knew stuff we didn't even do yet. That's the kind of legacy you don't clean off the books. Back in Brooklyn, a storefront gets renovated in Gravesend, a butcher shop that hadn't changed hands in 50 years. During demolition, workers discover a false wall in the back. Inside, nothing illegal, just an old wooden chair, a cigarette lighter, and a laminated photograph of the Verrazzano Bridge at dusk. No notes, no fingerprints. The owner, when asked about it, just says, don't ask, just build around it. And they do, because even in absence, Gaspipe is respected, or feared, or both. No one ever seemed quite sure which. Meanwhile, crime itself changes. Organized syndicates become scattered. The old code of silence fades into plea bargains and encrypted messaging. The new bosses wear sneakers, not suits. They smile for Instagram. Their rackets are digital. Their empires are made of clicks. But when one of them gets caught, and the headlines blare about the new mafia, somewhere in the comments, someone always types, he's no Gaspipe, and they're right. Because Casso never played to the crowd. He played the system. Even his betrayal, his infamous cooperation, was never about redemption. It was about survival. Yes. Control, absolutely. But never repentance. That word never crossed his lips. He never said sorry. Not once. Not to victims. Not to friends. Not to the government. He was many things, but never apologetic. There's a document, long buried in a federal archive, where Casso was asked to write a personal statement to the court before final sentencing. a chance to show remorse, to explain himself, to ask for mercy. He declined, left the page blank, and the judge, years later, reportedly stared at that blank space longer than the full report, because that was his statement. One correctional officer who guarded him during his final months describes a moment when Casso was handed his daily medication. Instead of swallowing it right away, he just held it, rolled it between his fingers, looked at the nurse and asked, "You ever wonder how many people forget you after you stop talking?" She didn't answer, and neither did he. Many people still think Casso chose to fade away on purpose, that he designed his own obscurity as a final power play. Others argue he simply lived too long, and the world forgot him on its own. So what do you think? Did he vanish, or did we stop listening? In 2023, a college student writing a thesis on organized crime visits the old Brooklyn neighborhoods. He finds that much has changed. Cafes instead of clubs, condos where car lots used to be. He asks around. Bartenders, shop owners, guys sitting on milk crates. Most shake their heads, but one older man, white hair, pressed slacks, eyes that still scan, leans in and says, "You're asking the wrong question, kid." "What's the right one?" the student asks. The man grins just a little. Not who he was, not what he did, just what did it cost him to be right that long? The student writes it down, but he never quite understands it, because understanding Gaspipe Casso isn't the point. Feeling him is, and you still can. In the silence that follows certain names, in the way people glance at their phones when the room gets too quiet, in the names that get remembered by not being spoken. Casso didn't want your praise. He didn't want your pity. He didn't want your version. He wanted to vanish, and somehow, in a world built on surveillance, he got his wish. No statues, no street named after him, no grave to visit, just the empty chair, and the name you don't dare say unless you check the room first, Gaspipe. In the quiet corners of criminal history, Anthony Gaspipe Casso remains like an unswept fingerprint, faint, incomplete, but unmistakable to those who know where to look. His story isn't one of redemption. It's not framed with violins or slow fades to black. It's not about justice or tragedy or the fall of a once great man. It's about the kind of power that doesn't need a spotlight to ruin you, and the kind of silence that outlives the scream. Long after his death, people still argue about what kind of man he was. Was he a genius of organization? A paranoid executioner? A loyal soldier turned vengeful informant? The answer might be yes to all of it, because Gaspipe was never one thing. He was a contradiction. Methodical but violent. Loyal but lethal. Quiet but unforgettable. He was a street kid with the mind of an auditor. A mobster who believed in structure more than brotherhood. A man who could whisper a death sentence and then kiss his mother's cheek that same evening. The legacy he leaves behind isn't about the murders or the betrayals or the records set. It's about how cleanly he vanished. Even now, there's no central monument, no gangland shrine. The mafia doesn't tell campfire stories about Gaspipe the way they do about Gotti or Castellano or even Joe Colombo, because Casso's stories aren't fun. They're cautionary. They're reminders that the man you underestimate might be the one you can't outrun. There's a file in an evidence locker somewhere, unopened since the early 90s. It contains a note from an anonymous source, typed, all caps. If you want to know who runs things, look for the man who never asks to be seen. That file was believed to refer to Casso. It was dismissed at the time, labeled unverified. But ask anyone who really watched how things moved in New York's underworld during the 80s and 90s, and they'll tell you that was Gaspipe's motto. He didn't show you power. He showed you what happened after. Many people still think he could have been something different. A union boss, a strategist, maybe even a politician if the winds had shifted. Others say he was always meant to be what he became, precise, feared, and alone. So what do you think? Was Anthony Casso a product of the system or its most efficient response? In the time since, organized crime has scattered. It's not gone, just quieter, smaller, less glamorous. The old codes are gone. The new guys don't last. They move fast, burn hot, get caught. No one builds empires anymore. They build escapes, and maybe that's why Casso's name still matters. Not because of who he killed, but because of how long he lasted. He outlived the bosses he worked for, outlasted the rivals he threatened, dodged the agents who hunted him. Even after he was caught, he controlled his narrative until the moment it no longer needed telling, because if you write the ending before anyone else can, they don't get to correct it. There's one more story. A man, a former NYPD officer, now retired and living in Maine, visits a secondhand bookstore in 2025. He finds an out-of-print biography on New York's 5 families, flips through it. In the index, he checks for Casso. 3 pages. He reads them slowly. There's no new information. But as he puts the book down, he whispers, mostly to himself, they still didn't get him. The clerk behind the counter hears it, says nothing. Because even now, years after the last news article, after the last breath, after the last cold coffee cup set down in a federal cell, Casso still feels unfinished. Not because his story wasn't told, but because he controlled the parts that weren't. So in the end, what do you call a man like that? Not a boss, not a rat, not a legend. You call him what he always was. A presence you feel but can't quite name. A pause in the sentence. A missing piece in the report. A ghost with a memory too sharp to fade. Anthony Casso didn't just leave the game. He made sure the rules would never be quite the same again. There's an old saying in Brooklyn. If no one knows who gave the order, then the order still stands. And long after Anthony Gaspipe Casso was gone from the streets, that's how some people still lived. Like somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the city, his instructions were still drifting through the cracks in the concrete. He became a kind of ghost protocol. Not a man anymore, but a method. And even the guys who never met him felt it. A parole officer once said that the toughest ex-wise guys he dealt with didn't flinch when asked about time in prison. But they always hesitated when asked, "Did you ever work under Casso?" Not because they were ashamed, because they didn't want to say it wrong. Because saying it wrong meant you didn't understand the man you were talking about. And that kind of ignorance had always been dangerous. After Casso's death, there were efforts, small, unofficial, to memorialize him in the underworld. A mural in a basement club, a tattoo on the arm of a second-tier enforcer, a vinyl recording someone claimed captured his voice during an old sit-down. None of it stuck. It all felt wrong, because Casso didn't want to be remembered in full. He wanted to be remembered in parts, in caution, in control, in systems so smooth they looked accidental. And maybe that's the strangest part of his legacy. He had the power to make people disappear, but never the desire to make himself known. He once told a fellow inmate, "The loudest guy in the room is just painting a target on his own mouth." That inmate stopped talking for a week. Many people still think Casso's greatest strength wasn't strategy or violence. It was patience. That he could wait longer than his enemies could stay confident. Others say he was always waiting, on a life that never quite came. So what do you think? Was his silence power or regret? There's a rumor that before he went underground in 1991, Casso wrote down 3 things on a napkin at a diner in Bay Ridge. No one lives forever. Some things live longer when unspoken. If I'm ever caught, assume I wanted to be. The napkin, if it ever existed, was never found. But the idea of it? That's what stuck. It pops up in books, podcasts, jailhouse stories. One guy swears he saw it framed in a private office in Staten Island. Another says it was burned at a funeral by someone who still owed him money. Truth is, it probably never existed, but no one wants to take the risk. Even in fiction, Gaspipe made people hesitate. And now, all these years later, his fingerprints still show up, not on crime scenes, but on behavior. A union vote that sways without explanation. A contractor who pulls out of a bid last minute. A man who skips town after getting a voicemail with nothing but breathing. They'll never prove it's him, but they'll wonder, and that wondering, that's the echo of control. The justice system has long since moved on. His file is sealed, his ashes unclaimed. His family, what little of it remained, disappeared into lives that don't mention his name. There are no annual visits, no grave flowers, just distance, because the farther you are from Gaspipe, the more likely you are to sleep at night. Still, there's one man, an ex-FBI agent now in his 70s, who still keeps a file marked Casso open, even though the case is closed, even though the man is dead, even though everyone says it's over. He says, I keep it because something about him never really sat down. When asked what that means, he just says, he didn't exit. He paused. And people like that don't stay paused forever. Maybe it's paranoia. Maybe it's truth. But either way, Anthony Casso's absence remains heavier than most men's presence. He was never the king. He was the lover beneath the throne. And even now, no one wants to know what happens if it ever shifts again. Sometimes, the most lasting legacy isn't carved in stone. It's whispered mid-sentence, then quickly changed, like someone remembering too late who might be listening. That's what Anthony Gaspipe Casso left behind. Not monuments, not memoirs, but the pause. You hear it in rooms where deals are struck. You feel it when someone says, we don't talk about that guy. It's not fear anymore. Not directly. It's something older, colder, like a superstition that grew up wearing a tailored suit and never looked back. There are retired men who still lock their doors a certain way, double-checking the deadbolt not out of habit, but because that's what Casso taught them. Not in words, in consequences. If something went wrong, he didn't raise his voice. He just raised the pressure until something cracked. He wasn't unpredictable. He was inevitable, and that's harder to forget. In the years following his death, a few journalists try to put together the definitive biography. One gets close. He tracks down school records, prison files, even finds an old priest who vaguely remembers hearing Casso's confession in the 70s. But the priest won't talk, not even now. He says, some men didn't come here for forgiveness. They came to confirm that God had heard them. The manuscript is never finished. Another writer attempts a podcast series, but stops halfway through, citing creative fatigue. What he doesn't say is that two separate sources pulled their interviews at the last minute, both citing bad feelings and just not wanting to be involved. There's no curse, just a chill, like a door left open in a room you thought was locked. Many people still think that Casso's longest play wasn't any hit, any bribe, or any turncoat move. It was the creation of a persona so controlled, so precise, that it continues to edit its own history. Others argue that myth-making does that on its own. So what do you think? Did he write his legend, or just refuse to edit it? In the southern tip of Brooklyn, there's a bar that's changed hands 6 times in 10 years. Nothing suspicious, just bad luck, bad owners, bad timing. One of the bartenders swears the place used to be a meeting spot for Lucchese guys. Nobody believes him, until one night, a customer walks in, older, scarred hands, quiet eyes, orders a seltzer, leaves a $100 bill, says nothing, just nods toward the back wall where a coat hook hangs crooked. The bartender goes to fix it later. Behind it, A small indentation in the wood. Looks like it once held a nail, maybe a note, maybe something else. He doesn't touch it. Just leaves the hook askew, like it's meant to stay that way, because some messages don't need decoding. They just need remembering. Another story floats around. A guy finds a briefcase in his grandfather's attic. Inside, newspaper clippings, burner phone, old .38 revolver, and a handwritten name on a folded envelope. Salvatore Avellino. He calls a friend who knows a guy. That guy knows another guy. And within 2 days, the briefcase disappears. No police, no theft report, just gone. When asked what he learned from the whole experience, the man shrugs and says, "That history doesn't hide. It just waits until you're not ready." And that's the quiet brilliance of Casso's design. He didn't try to make himself a legend. He didn't care about fame. He cared about control, and more importantly, sustained ambiguity. He understood the power of not being fully known, of only being glimpsed. He made a weapon of the unsaid, a currency out of confusion, a myth out of muteness. And now, decades after his final breath, he still holds court. Not in tabloids, but in side eyes. Not in quotes, but in quiet recalculations. A ripple, not a splash. A rule, not a story. And perhaps that's why he remains so present in absence. Because when you hear about a move too clean, a silence too precise, a presence too invisible, you can't help but wonder, is that Gaspipe's shadow? And even if it's not, you act like it is, just in case. The most haunting thing about Anthony Gaspipe Casso isn't the body count. It isn't even the betrayals or the calm way he dictated death from a telephone booth. It's the fact that after everything, after the murders, the manhunts, the confessions, the silence, there's still no complete picture of who he really was. You can stack every court record, every surveillance note, every whispered bar story, and still come away feeling like something's missing. Because it is. That's how he planned it. Casso didn't believe in legacy. He believed in leverage. And legacy, for all its glory, can be stolen, twisted, turned into something else. Leverage, though? Leverage stays useful, even after you're gone. One federal agent, looking back over the files decades later, says, Gaspipe had dirt on everyone. Not just the mob guys, judges, detectives, union leaders. He kept things just shy of blackmail, but never out of reach. He didn't need to use it. People used themselves. In the world of organized crime, most guys peak, then explode, burn fast, go down swinging, or disappear in a haze of cocaine, headlines, and federal indictments. But Casso, he slid, from soldier to underboss to ghost to inmate to footnote. A perfect slope, no sharp edges, no clear drop, just steady erosion of public presence, carefully calibrated. He made himself harder to trace than blood through bleach. Many people still think that Casso had more to say, that somewhere, maybe recorded, maybe written, there's a final account. Others say he already said everything he needed to, by never answering the wrong question. So what do you think? Is his silence a story waiting to be told? Or the whole point of the story? A warehouse in New Jersey is torn down in 2026. One of the demolition workers finds a sealed box behind a collapsed beam. Inside, paper ledgers, all dated from the late 80s, handwritten in block letters. No names, just dates, dollar signs, and city names. It goes straight to evidence. Nothing gets released. But the next day, a federal prosecutor suddenly retires. No one connects the dots. Publicly. Elsewhere, a young mob enthusiast on a Reddit forum tracks the coordinates of every known Casso sighting from 1990 to 1993. They overlay it on a map of New York. What they find is eerie. Every location forms a near-perfect arc. From the Verrazzano Bridge to Sheepshead Bay, tracing a curve that avoids police precincts, wiretap-heavy zones, and known informant bars. It wasn't just evasion, it was design. The thread gets taken down within 48 hours. The user deletes their account, and just like that, the pattern fades. Back into silence. That's the afterlife Casso built. Not with prayers, not with mourning, but with discomfort, with unspoken details, with open files and closed mouths. He doesn't haunt like a ghost. He operates like unfinished business. There's a woman, once married to a man who worked for Casso. She lives in Florida now, quiet, retired. Asked once if she ever feared for her life back then, she laughs. Soft, tired. He wouldn't kill you. That's the thing. He'd make sure you wanted to disappear first. And that's what makes it all stick. Because while most mobsters leave behind drama, scars, and gory stories, Casso left behind a different legacy, vanishing as an art form. One where fear isn't a scream, it's a blank line. Where power isn't proven, it's assumed. Where memory isn't shared, it's calculated. And so here we are, still telling the story. Not because it brings closure, but because it doesn't. And in that unfinished space, Anthony Casso still breathes. Not in flesh, not in sound, but in the nervous glance, the sudden hush, the hesitation that enters the room a half step ahead of his name. He was never the loudest. He was just the last one standing after everyone else had stopped talking. There are stories that end with a bang. And then there are stories like Anthony Gaspipe Casso's, ones that just stop mid-thought, as if the narrator left the room and no one dared to finish the sentence. No funeral footage, no graveside scene, no dramatic last confession. Just the quiet closing of a very dangerous chapter, followed by decades of silence that somehow feels louder than all the headlines that came before. It's hard to describe the weight Casso left behind, because it wasn't theatrical. It was structural, like removing a beam from the middle of a building. The frame still stands, but the pressure, the creaks in the walls, the strange draft that shows up around midnight, that's him. Not haunting, not lingering, just reminding that he was once here, that some things aren't gone, they're just unattended. Longtime mob watchers still try to place him on the hierarchy of criminal fame. Gotti was the peacock, Castellano, the empire builder, Gigante, the ghost in the bathrobe. But Casso? Casso was the codebreaker, the one who saw the flaws in the architecture and exploited them so elegantly. You didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. He wasn't larger than life. He fit inside it, like a wire in the wall. Many people still think that Casso represented the end of the old mob, a final warning that the rules were dead. Others think he was just the last man honest enough to act like it. So what do you think? Was he the collapse or the obituary? Somewhere in Brooklyn, there's a garage that's been closed for 20 years. Dusty, windows painted black, no record of who owns it, no mail delivered, just the faint outline of a sign that used to read Bayside Alignment. Twice a year, a man in a gray van parks outside for 5 minutes, checks the lock, and drives away. No one knows why. No one asks. And in that quiet ritual lies the blueprint of Casso's legacy. No announcements, no closure, just maintenance, because to this day, pieces of him remain scattered, not in places you'd recognize, but in details you wouldn't notice unless you already knew to look. A number scratched into the underside of a drawer. A voicemail with just 3 seconds of silence. A phone bill with one disconnected call to a payphone that hasn't existed since 1994. The clues are there, not because he wanted to be found, but because he wanted to prove he was never really lost. And now, as the lights dim on this story, this whispered biography of Brooklyn's cold whisperer, you're left with more questions than answers. That was his design. Casso didn't want to be understood. He wanted to be remembered incorrectly, because every wrong version of him keeps the real one safe, buried, intact, dangerous. And if you're still awake, still wondering where truth ends and design begins, then maybe he won. Maybe this was the last play. Not a hit, not a name drop, but a memory you can't quite place. A ghost that doesn't vanish, just stays unsolved. So now, as the hour stretches into stillness and the shadows settle into the quiet places of your room, let this final image fade gently in the mind. A streetlight flickering on an empty Brooklyn sidewalk. Somewhere, a shutter creaks in the wind. A lock clicks quietly into place. And in the distance, where the fog begins to blur the city's outline, a man once known as Gaspipe Casso is walking away. Coat pressed, hands steady, head low. There's no chase, no noise, no goodbyes, just a hush that follows him like a second shadow, the kind of hush you don't dare disturb. Let it be a lesson in quiet power, and in how silence, when shaped deliberately, can hold more weight than 1,000 shouted confessions. Not every story wants a neat ending. Not every name wants remembering. Some simply ask that you carry the pause, so as your breath slows and your body softens beneath the blankets, know that this story, like so many echoes from the past, was never meant to startle you awake. It was meant to carry you gently toward sleep, the way fog swallows a city one corner at a time. Let it drift, let it settle, let it sleep. Good night, friend.